So welcome to Blastland podcast. We're going to dive deep into the world of sound and podcasting today. We have a very special guest, Darryl von Däniken. And Darryl, I have a lot of things I would love to talk to you about today. But first of all, welcome.
Thank you, Dimi. I'm thrilled to be here. In fact, I've been in the podcast business for a while in audio. This is the first time I'm actually behind the microphone that I'm going to be in a podcast. How about that?
Well, congratulations. So that's nice to hear. That's nice to hear.
No one ever asked me before, so thank you for asking me.
Very glad to have you. Happy to have you here today. Darryl, the first ice-breaking question, what is the secret sauce of a good podcast to you?
Good storytelling, what I imagine we're going to do right now.
Okay, brief and clear. Brief and clear. The world of sound is about audio. What's, in your opinion, the difference and the big impact between a video podcast, which is quite a popular media today, and an audio podcast?
Oh, that's a big question. Let me just come back first. Well, first of all, actually, a video podcast is a video podcast, just like a newspaper is a newspaper. So a podcast is audio only. So just as much as TV is TV, a film is film, there's all the different mediums. And from that point of view, what you and I are doing now is storytelling, which brings me back to your original just question, which I answered about storytelling. You know, we learn to hear before we learn to see. And we learn storytelling whilst we learn to walk. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't remember learning to walk, but I got here pretty easily without thinking about it. So storytelling is all about communicating, about communication and understanding, being able to make a picture, to understand what the other person is saying. So it is inherent of our behavior of listening. And I suppose that explains why audio will always trump. It's very political right now, but excuse the pun, but it will trump all other media, because it's the first medium we learnt in order to survive. Because, hearing is always on. I always used to tell my children, small anecdote here, I was at the dinosaur museum, and my eldest son, he's about 6 or 7 in those days, he was crazy about dinosaurs. It was the whole big craze when dinosaurs came. You may remember those shows at Crystal Palace, walking with dinosaurs.
Yeah. Anyway,
he asked me why dinosaurs didn't have any ears, because he was really into the T-Rex, and the other little small hands and small ears. And I was going to try and give him a smart answer, but I didn't have an answer for that because I'm not a dinosaur expert. But it made me think, well, actually, I don't know, but it's important that we have ears. Why? Because it's better to hear the dinosaur before we see it. So it's a warning system. And everything we hear, we turn into pictures. So back again to your question about, what's the difference between a video cast or a podcast? They're just two different mediums. One requires you to have full attention, i.e. sit down or stand and look at a screen and get distracted by a visual element to a story. And distracted, I mean, you get distracted by someone rubbing their nose or maybe, scratching their ear. And you start your subconscious starts to not make its own pictures. It's being influenced. And I would say not in a positive way, because we as human beings, especially when it comes to visual, especially in today's video-centric world, which is great. It's a great input for our senses, but we're actually criticizing all the time. We are all the best video critics there are, and so some people are better in front of the camera than others. Actors are generally good in front of the cameras, but maybe a CEO or me or you, we might not be good. And if you imagine that you are producing a podcast series, for example, and you have different guests, some guests will be better in front of the camera than others. And that has an influence in how you rate and absorb that particular conversation. On top of it all is that if you have a camera in front of you, you're going to act. There's nothing wrong in that. It's just, smile for the camera. And that comes back down to what I just said a moment ago, and that is some people are better in front of the camera than others. And we will judge that content by how good someone is actually in front of the camera and less about the content they have to speak about.
That's an interesting story. So would it be fair to say that for the listeners of audio podcasts, it's probably even more interesting because they have to be more creative. They don't have to pick. They don't have the video in front of them. They have just the sound in the earphones. And it's can be even more entertaining in some way.
Well, it's a choice, between the different mediums and the time you want to consume it. So what I would say is when you listen, you are free to do any other stuff because that's what you've learned. We can actually be multifunctional. Even us men can be multifunctional. We can chew gum and walk at the same time, and we can listen to something, and it has far more impact. And also when it comes to podcast media, and one has to ask myself, why have podcasts kind of this trajectory which is steeper than the uptake of the internet if you compare it time on time? Why is that? And that is not because it is just a trend or it's the thing to do right now. It is because in our over-digitalized environment, where we almost feel compelled to have to consume media the moment we go on our phone, this one-dimensional, over-digitalized world that has quick tools to react, like the emojis, because it's quick media. Very little impact. It's stressful. It's 1,000 things at once, which is great for a moment to get inspired or to see where should we go out or just kind of just while the time away. But it's not very thought-provoking. It's not doing much for our brain. It's frying our brain essentially with thoughts. I don't mean as in with radiation, although that's also of course the subject with the earpods. So we choose to listen to a podcast is because it's the only medium at the speed of humans.
That's an interesting
speech.
thing.
If I speak too quickly or if I speak too slowly, it's not a very what was the word I'm looking for? Nice experience. That's what I'm saying here. I have to do that again there. But it's at the speed of humans. And all the other media is very quickly, watching a video. In order to watch a video, it's got to be cut and edited in small packets so that you keep your attention. But it's overburdening your brain, actually. It's great in a thriller or an action movie for, those moments where the gaming comes into it and there's a car chase. But we need to relax, again, in order to absorb it all. So people listen to podcasts is because they're choosing, they want to consume media. They've seen all the pictures, etc. Now it's time off. And they have media at the speed of humans, of us, and they can consume it whilst they're doing something else. And the interesting thing is that when you discover a podcast usually in social media or somewhere along the line where you can click, it's rarely that we consume it immediately because it's not the right time, because social media and media generally has been positioned as now. It's always now. That's why if we come across a video and we see it's 2 minutes long, for us that is, oh my God, that's I might be dead by then. It kind of stresses us, and then we fast forward and we kind of try and imagine what the answer or the outcome of this video is going to be. We're not really enjoying it. If you come across a podcast, and of course the title, and if you read a bit more, that it's a subject matter that interests you, you're more than likely than anything else going to tell yourself, oh, I'm going to listen to that later. And as you go into that thought process, you've already made a picture when? On the way home, or when you go jogging in the evening, or when you're going to go and paint the living room the next day. You've made a picture. No other media gets that investment.
That's true. That's absolutely true. An interesting thought. Really interesting. I never thought about it in this way. Darryl, you said before the story, you told the story about the Jurassic Park dinosaurs about your son asking you a question. What's your story? Tell a bit more about yourself. What you did? What's the milestones of your story?
Oh, I'm not sure we've got that long, and people will be that interested. But I can kind of perhaps rewind from where we are now and how I got into audio. I've always been in media in one way or another. And media entertainment. For me, media is entertainment because most of what media carries is some form of entertainment, gossip or events or acts, movies, films, music, etc. And I got into entertainment in the 80s. I was studying architecture. And in those days, we had to learn everything about reproduction. There were no PDFs for graphics. In fact, being a graphic artist was a bit like being an astronaut. There was no way to get to some printed matter without going through a graphic artist because he or she knew the color separation process, the whole lithography and reproduction processes. To go to a printer, you couldn't go to a printer because the printer would just look at you, where's the artwork? And the only way you could have artwork, it had to be prepared by a graphic artist. And I knew how to do that. And it was an interesting time in those days, in the late 80s, the second summer of love, the whole acid house movement, the Smiley coming back in again from the 60s. I had a friend, I was living in Brighton in those days. I had a friend at the end of the pier, and he asked me whether I could get Smiley T-shirts printed, because the guy who was buying it off couldn't deliver, was ripping off, or whatever. And of course, I knew how to do that, and that was the color separation, the yellow and the black. That it matches, you take it to the printer, and what's interesting is that the whole acid house that explosion was the last time there was actually a youth movement that came totally under the radar from the establishment. Not because it was chosen, that was just the way it happened, just like punk, just like the New Romantics, just like the Charleston in its day, all the rockabillys, the rockers. They were all generational movements to differentiate from the generation in front of you, and especially your parents, society, the establishment. So it was an incredible time. It was really, if you were at the right place at the right time, by default, and you just had a bit of a notion or a bit of a feeling for it, you really couldn't go wrong. So that's where I was. So I very quickly got into the whole merchandising with all the acid house T-shirts, and within a very short period, we were already supplying Topshop in those days, belonging to the Burton Group, and then you're suddenly getting into kimbling and folding and packaging, and cash flow issues as a business. I was 19, 20, something like this, 21. Factoring in order to preserve your cash flow. High margin. You think there's never a tomorrow. And then, of course, the story broke. The story of the whole acid house broke in the mainstream media, because all these raves were taking place outside of clubs, in warehouses, or in aircraft hangars from the Second World War that was still standing on farmers' land dotted around London and Manchester and up north. And the law in those days was, if you wanted to organize an event in a pub, you needed all sorts of licenses or an extension if you wanted to go until 12 o'clock, highly, highly regulated. But on private land, it didn't really cover it. So that's where we ended up. And I was just always supplying the merchandise for those events, etc. But like I said, yes, it then broke. And then, ecstasy and acid, they become household words. Your aunt, your grandmother heard about it. Anybody wearing a Smiley T-shirt, anything related, was immediately classed as the establishment as a drug addict, somebody with no future. What the media's like. They like to jump on things, etc. It really scared, don't forget, music has always scared the establishment. It's always been controlled. The church controlled music. They gave Mozart the permission to be a genius. Let's put it that way. And music is, all the way down into the National Socialist days, jazz being considered, degenerate. And why? Because it gave people a free will.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's the last time. So that was one reason why the Criminal Public Order Act came in the early 90s, which essentially banned raves. Now, it was a good thing on the one hand because you needed to regulate. There was a lot of shenanigans going on in regards to drug consumption and no control, fire exits, etc. These are all good things, but not to try and stamp out a movement, and you can't stamp out movements like that. But the law essentially made, well, if we had, it just went out there, the law said, more than two people sitting around the table listening to the radio could be termed a rave. There's music, there's two people, they've got money in their pocket, maybe there's some sort of transaction going on, and that law allowed whoever discovered it to confiscate your equipment, your radio, and take all your money and tell you to go out. And out of that, the whole club business then developed into taking it into clubs as a promoter, because you had your following, your guest, not your guest list, but your subscribers, your community, which in those days was all by post, of course. Didn't happen by phone yet, with even the few mobile phones that were around in those days. And that's how the whole club business. But I'm digressing. How do we get into media? So that kind of got me into the entertainment world. For entertainment, you need media to communicate. We started working a lot with Kiss FM, of course, which was one of the channels that made DJs to rockstar.
Wow.
Pirate station, because mainstream media wouldn't play all that acid house stuff. There was no place for it. It scared people. You didn't have anybody in the music programming department that understood that music, and they had a relation to the generation that was consuming that music, because it scared them. Simply as that. One thing leads to another. We all grew up, and we started printing T-shirts because we'd learned a lot about the T-shirt business. We started printing T-shirts. Well, actually, we realized that printing T-shirts in fashion is high margin and high risk, because overnight, when this story broke in the newspapers about if your child is wearing one of these T-shirts, it's a drug addict, and they were all our T-shirts. There's no getting away from it. And not because we were responsible for that, but that was just the association. So Topshop, very quickly, we had a fax through saying, we're just putting your orders on hold. We had legal tender orders. We were factoring those invoices. But, who are you, a 21-year-old, going to win against the Burton Group because you've got the best lawyers? And so I was advised, look, you're going to win in 5-7 years, but, I don't know where you'll be. You'll probably be in the mental asylum or something.
Exactly.
So we just switched and we started printing for other people. So that's low margin, but low risk, but much higher turnover in actual output. So we moved on, and the 90s came along, and magazines were in the 90s before the internet. That was the internet, and the internet lives of media in the sense that it's gossip related. Let's face it.
Yeah,
it's not just CNN giving the latest stock market indices. It is generally the mainstay of whatever we are consuming, etc. It's all gossip, whether it's for celebrities or politicians or whatever's going on. It's in the old days it used to be they used to call the washerwoman, by the local fountain where everybody's washing, and just gossiping. That's what it's all about. And magazines were the internet. The Hello magazines. And OK, and Now, and various. They were springing up, like mushrooms after a damp night. So we were kind of engaged in kind of celebrity product launches, in the sense that Max Factor was launching a new makeup range, and Madonna in those times was, for example, one of their ambassadors. As much as a new opening, it's in London, the Hermes or the launch of, a new vodka by Smirnoff. And this has like an ecosystem where the brands need the stars and the stars need the brands. And with stars, I mean, soap stars, footballers. Every country has its nucleus of all these people. In Switzerland we call it the Cerveler Prominenz.
Mm-hmm.
Cerveler Promis, I mean. So one needs the other. And it was these were hot ticket events, etc. And when we would get a call from the local radio station, mainly Capital Radio, which was still the largest and only in those days commercial radio station, when they phoned up and asked whether they could be credited to these events, my assistant, would tell me it's Capital Radio on the line, and I wasn't bothered. I didn't understand radio. And I didn't understand radio because I was, what actually turned the way this developed was as follows. One day she asked me, "What's your beef with radio?" And I had to kind of ask myself, and I very quickly said, "Well, it's old. We don't need that anymore. We've got TV now. We've got the magazines. We're much faster and in-your-face media world." Because I'd really been conditioned myself. I had to realize, that I'd become a media Klugscheißer, basically, as you say in German, that you only have to be concerned with new stuff. We're conditioned to always replace old with new stuff. We don't perhaps repair something or nurture it or maybe readjust it. We kind of kick it out. We throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I thought about it, and she kind of pointed out, is that, well, look, we've got high-ticket events. Loads of people like to do, celebrity spotting, outside as they get out of the car and go into the venue, because they were private events. If we tell Capital, or wherever the radio station would be, that this is taking place, so on the afternoon, we'll have a crowd outside. And a crowd always means that something's happening. It's like I know it's shallow, but it boosts your impression that this is the place to be. So we did that, and lo and behold, of course, that's exactly what happened. So I had a word with myself. I took myself by my by my scruff and said, "Okay, so include radio in your media mix where it makes sense." And over time, I then started working far more with radio. I ran the Ministry of Sound in Switzerland. That's kind of fast forwarding a bit, and radio was really, very much part of what the Ministry of Sound's all about. Because in those days we didn't have Spotify or anything, and there was only radio, but there were a few channels that were played non-stop. Be able to tune in to that kind of clubbing music, clubbing content. And I just started getting more and more interested in radio, and I thought, well, I'll go to one of these conferences. Every vocation has a conference. There's the motor show, that's all about cars, and that's a public thing, of course. But even the Belgian Photocopiers Association has probably some exhibition in Belgium that is servicing that industry. And I couldn't really find anything I couldn't find any event or B2B conference convention that celebrated radio that I had broken down in my mind. What is radio? And radio really, what's the heartbeat of radio? The heartbeat of radio is the anchor, the speaker, and the producer. Producer you don't really hear much about, but those are the two people that are radio, because the rest is technology. Radio is about storytelling, what you and I are doing right now, that interrupts the storytelling. That's what good radio is. Good radio is not about playing the best hits, because that's actually a lie. I'll come back to that in a minute. Good radio is where you're engaged with the storytelling that's taking place. Whenever you decide to listen to radio, people have their radio moment. Many people in the morning in the car, on the school run, going to work, or when they're coming home in the evening, or they are particularly interested in a special form of story of genre. I mean, in that respect, it's all hearing about the music and just the ongoing banter and conversation. And what a lovely day. Radio is very local as well. That's one reason why Apple Radio never was a success, because Apple Radio was coming out of LA or somewhere, or Silicon Valley. But what time was it? Is it a sunny day? Is it not? Not that we are consciously looking for those things, but those things are missing if they're not there.
So you could not relate to that, actually.
Exactly. So, the heartbeat of radio. So there were various radio conventions with the NAB in Las Vegas, as broadcast generally, or IBC in Amsterdam. They're massive, but they are really for the professions. They're for the techies. They're for the people who make the microphone and are going to clean this podcast up, the software that's recording it at the moment. So I decided to create my own. So I founded the International Radio Festival. It had actually been an idea of a colleague of mine, but he had a different idea. He wanted to create an event where he has music DJs, which are radio DJs, that will play for free, so that he has a free, kind of a mini music festival. But of course, people can see through that. There isn't much sustainability in abusing, having a hidden agenda with what you are wanting to offer them as much as the crowd, etc. It's not sustainable. But we created the radio festival, and it was the one, and still it's the only event of its kind that celebrates the heartbeat of radio, the anchor and the producer, where they can deliberate, they can express and share their trials and tribulations, the challenges, how it's developing, etc. Because music radio is still the most consumed medium in the world. It is still number one in the world. In Switzerland alone, 85% of people still listen to radio in one form or another. It's is omnipresent radio, so to speak. It's not the only medium, but it's part of the media mix. And of course, listening, as we said earlier on, of all media, what has the most impact? That's audio, because audio is the most visual of all media. Because everything we hear, we turn into pictures. We have to do that, because otherwise we wouldn't understand or attempt to understand what the other person is saying. So that's we got to the radio festival, and it's great discovery of people who are good at storytelling and engaging, this intimacy with the microphone, and of course, just to kind of close. This will teach you to ask questions like that. Okay, they're going to be very long answers.
I'm patient enough.
Is that if you kind of then take it to the ultimate viewpoint, where we are with media, is that media has been used by brands to promote their services and products. That media lives from that in order to feature the gossip. That's what pays for it, so to speak. The entertainment. Media is entertainment, and gossip is entertainment. It's a mainstay, like we said earlier on. And if you think about it, there is, and of course, all brands, all services, in order to promote themselves, they're in the business of storytelling. How are you going to find out about them? They have to talk about their product, their services. And they do this in text, and they do this in video and in pictures. And they kind of also do it sometimes with radio advertising. But if we just look at the word storytelling, what is storytelling? Well, storytelling is what you and I are doing right now. And brands and services, they are maintaining an audio vacuum in the media mix. They are letting their consumers, their customers, their communities, anybody who's engaged with them, read about them, watch them, look at them. And they're all, different moments in the day, aren't they? You might have time to quickly to read something at length. You've got a lot more time to just look at a picture, and you might have the patience to watch a video. And we expect all of that, but there's no choice to listen to their story. And I'm not talking about a radio ad. I'm talking about, imagine you are the CEO of, Unilever, big brand, or Mercedes, or Chupa Chups, or whatever it may be, because you will be featured on the website of your company. And there will be some sort of, little short text. It can't be too long because we don't want to overburden the user because, it's too much to read. I won't read it at all. But there'll be a certain text there about how passionate you are as a CEO of, Chupa Chups. And that text will have gone to and fro to legal. The picture that's there has gone, to the retouching department 50 times, all for compliance. And if there's a video, that's been shot in a fancy location with many camera angles, etc., not too long as well. But of course, all of that is fine. We as consumers, we are very suspicious. Our nature of being suspicious is actually, our firewall is in order to unburden ourselves of the zillions amount of messaging that comes in. We have to get rid of all of it as quickly as possible so we can at least have a little bit of time and concentration on that we choose. So in a consumer's point of view, in consuming anything, it's all about getting rid of information so that we have a bit of focus, like your desktop on your computer. If there's too much on there, it slows everything down. It's clutter. So imagine, so it's very easy. So when we read a text, about sustainability, the chief sustainability officer, they're reading this text, and you could really just exchange the logos of this company. They all have the same message. They want to save the planet, which is great, fantastic. Might be tuned a bit to their industry segment, but our subconscious is going, yeah. Of course you're saying this. Yeah. Yeah. We watch the video. We're going to ourselves, yeah. Clearly, we want to actually, because by having chosen to actually consume this bit of media, we're already on the way to trying to convince ourselves, yes, I want this, because we're actually our own salespeople for other people's products. So, if you then have the opportunity also to listen to the CEO's story, and not exactly what he or she is saying in the text and in the video, but you have a bit of an in-depth interview with a good host. So, CEO of Chupa Chups, how did you end up at Chupa Chups? What a great story that is. And that is where you hear the authenticity, when you hear their story, because we all understand stories, even though we may never have lived in Spain, because Chupa Chups is a Spanish brand. The logo was designed by Salvador Dali, by the way, of Chupa Chups. We may have never been in that position, but the story they say when they were kids, and maybe they, it was a treat once a month because the grandparents came and they could buy him or her a Chupa Chups, whatever the story is, we can relate to that, and that makes it personal. That authenticity is just miles above anything else in any kind of corporate commercial communication. So the world of storytelling and audio has yet to break. That's yet to come, because almost without exception, every brand out there is not offering its audiences that it's trying to engage the opportunity to hear their story. Whether it's about the CEO, whether about the chief sustainability officer, what they're doing, about new talent, about the product designer of the latest Air Max. That's probably a massive nerd. However, if you have a good host that hears the story of the product designer of the latest Nike Max Air, they have a story, and that story is what makes it real.
Darryl, in a world where there is a huge overload of information coming from various media, especially for the younger generations with the earpods in the ears and all the social media networks. What do you think makes for the younger generation to listen to some podcasts? What is the motivation for the younger generation to go and listen and plug in and just take the time for a podcast?
Well, I think sorry. Yeah, it's a question, I suppose. I mean, no one's making them. They're aware of it. Podcasts are being produced, they're being promoted, And, the great thing about digital age is that you can see how many people are clicking and for how long. So obviously there is a demand for that. I can only bring it back down to, well, listening to podcasts is the closest to having listened to a story, when you were a kid. All children in the world, once they've been taken care of with, safety, food and shelter, it's please tell me a story. And those stories are usually by one person. Usually a story is read or communicated by one person. One person and a listenership of minimum one person mainly, but of course there can be others. And I think it's, we are so informed today about everything, mainly probably misinformed, but we are informed, and we're hungry for knowledge, and we're creatures of comfort, and of all the channels, listening is the easiest. So we're going to take the easiest way. It's like water running down a wall. It's going to find the quickest way down to ruining your carpet. Not that podcasts are going to ruin your carpet, of course.
I found especially your tagline or your slogan very interesting. You're saying that listen, imagine, and discover. And my question would be, isn't it the other way around? Discover, listen, and imagine?
No. Listening, well, yes, I suppose, but we mustn't get too pedantic about that. It's just general, usually, the thing is that if I say something to you haven't heard before, the first thing is that you're listening, and then you kind of look up to try and make the picture. That's the imagine, and then you've discovered what you've heard. That's really what that means.
That's the formula.
Yes.
Well, that's cool. From your experience with the Saudi Broadcasting Authority, you've seen global trends evolving. What are the cultural differences if you take a look at at your time working with the Saudi Broadcasting Authority to the Swiss radio? What are the cultural? Are there any cultural differences?
Oh, of course, there's cultural differences between every kind of language region and regions within itself. And why? Because it all comes down to the type of gossip. Gossip is local, generally. That's what you can relate to. So just another example is, to my English ears, when I listen to Italian radio, for me, Italian radio is talk radio. Yeah, because they talk a lot. So if you take the Radio 1 equivalent in Italy, on DJ radio, I would expect to be hearing non-stop, tunes, but they're just talking non-stop. It's a cultural thing. But what they're all talking about, if you break it down into, big Duplo Lego blocks, it's football, sport, politics, gossip, and they're all they are related to the locality in one form or another. So if I compare, let's say, Saudi with Switzerland, they're both developed countries. They're well traveled. They all they're like sport, they're like gossip, they're like entertainment, they're like interest in politics or whatever it may be. But it's just according to the worlds that touches them and interests them. It's exactly the same.
I would like to make a small pit stop about radio. Do you listen to the radio?
Do you know what? Not that much. But if I do listen to the radio, I have two moments. And they're generally morning moments. One is I listen to talk radio in the morning. Something that I missed actually in Switzerland. There's no talk radio. Talking about the current affairs of the day, the politics. So I listen to LBC in the morning, which is, phone-in talk radio. And I find myself talking to myself or talking to the radio, as you do. I do that whilst I do my morning stretches and attempt to stay fit a bit. And then later on in the morning, I like to listen to Music 6 by the BBC. Mm-hmm. And that really is, radio is still the number one place for discovering music. And yes, people say Spotify is a place to discover music, but you've got to go and look and read about it yourself all the time. And that's quite laborious. But when you're just listening and you're hearing about the music from the anchor and the stories behind it, where you might be able to go and hear them or who they used to work with, just kind of adding scale, adding depth to what you've heard. Your ears prick up, obviously, if you hear a tune you like, and then you go and listen even more about what they're all about. So you've already added a moment, and you've added someone else's impression and information to a song you like. That's 3 elements compared to only 1 element, and maybe another element with Spotify, where you have to go and look. And it means nothing. It's just, and today's, names of bands, they're getting more and more challenged in being, coming up with an original name, because most of the, obviously more and more names are taken all the time. They're like URLs, I suppose, Pink Pussycat Feet with bows, they're going to be either very long names or just it or a, and then they're going to run out of the alphabet, aren't they? So, yes, hearing about stories, about the music, etc., and their own impression, I find quite satisfying.
What's your favorite podcast or podcast?
I don't really have a favorite podcast, to be very honest. I'm quite impressed with when I first discovered Steven Bartlett on the UK's Dragon Den. It's kind of in a way a British Joe Rogan, but not, because he's an entrepreneur more than what Joe Rogan is, I suppose. And no disrespect to Joe Rogan in any way. I find I love his questioning. I love his the way he formulates his curiosity to dig deeper, not to catch people out, to understand, to help the listener understand. Essentially, adding scale to that. What I don't like about these podcasts is that they run for 2, almost 3 hours at some point. I think it's rude, to be honest, because it locks people in for 3 hours. Few people can concentrate for that long. It takes up your time when maybe you could have listened to 3 podcasts. That's why I think it's rude. It's a bit like, putting your bath towel on the deck chair by the hotel pool, and then you go on a city tour. It's occupying space. You only got so much time you can invest in listening and taking time off, etc. And it becomes a bit of a monologue, which I just hear myself saying monologue. I hope I'm not sounding like a monologue right now. We can do this under 1 hour.
No, you don't. Darryl, humor always breaks the barriers. So, as a creative and visionary guy, how do you integrate humor into your projects while at the same time maintaining, in several cases where it's necessary, the professionalism, of course? What's the secret behind it?
Well, I think I hope you agree that there's a time and place for humor. Humor can be used in all sorts of ways. If you're talking about a super serious subject, I don't think there's the right moment to be funny about anything. Might be good to be humorous in a way to break the ice at the beginning, to show, to shoot the human side of 2 people having a conversation, for example. I think it's more a question of having humility as opposed to humor. The right place at the right time, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I mean, I hope you weren't expecting me to be making you, bring you to laugh all the time. Right
No,
now.
not really. Not really. What's the most valuable lesson you have ever learned in your entire life?
Patience. Patience is a virtue. I can't say any more than that. Patience, yes.
Did you have moments in life where you would say, well, that was a fail, a complete fail?
Oh gosh, yes, many times. You have to, we learn through mistakes. I think that's okay to learn from mistakes. I think it's you just have to start asking yourself if you're making the same mistakes all the time. If one can be honest enough with oneself, without excusing yourself away from repeating the same mistakes all the time. But I think it's okay to fail and try again and again and again. I came across a very interesting individual recently, funny enough, in this building at the Swiss Podcast Festival, whose studio this is, by the way. And his name is Frei.
I know him.
You know Alan? Okay, there you are. So you know his story, yeah? So he's half Filipino, half Swiss. He had 52 businesses. They were all a failure. And then he founded Amarama, which was what can I say? A sex servicing. Everything that has to do with fun in the bedroom. From lingerie to whatever. I have to be careful that we don't upset any listeners here in that. And he had bingo, and then he sold it to a bigger group and made a ton of money. And he's very honest about it. And he said, you had to do that 52 times. You can't just give up like that, not trying again. If you try the same thing 52 times, then, if you get as far as 52 times, you should get a medal for that anyway. But yeah, you live and learn. It's what we do. I think what's happening at the moment is that in this very me society, it's all about me, and that's good. To be evaluating me in your own space, within yourself, but expecting the whole world to accept, me, and everyone has their own little foibles, and you have to treat me like this or call me that, and expect then also that to happen in the workspace. We have a problem. Because no one achieved, or little was achieved just by yourself. Stuff is achieved through collaboration. And in an environment of going to work, there's a portfolio of people that make something happen all together, that at the end of the day lets the owner or the owners of that particular company drive a profit, which will pay your wages and hopefully good working conditions and good benefits, etc. Can't be considering everybody's individual requests for they want to need time off again for another tattoo, or they need to bring their dog or their iguana or their parrot it's absolute nonsense. So that's, I think, where we need to be watching out.
Alan Frei, I'm subscribed to him.
Yes.
And he tokenized himself recently.
Yes.
And he writes that he's also a Uber Eats driver.
Yes, so he was.
He was, yeah.
Yes, he was. I think he does it anyway, but he did that because the story goes he gained incredible weight and he wanted to get fit because now he'd made all this money by selling Amarama. He was, I don't know, 200 pounds. I think he said he was really overweight. He showed a picture on the screen, and compared to what we saw in real life, he certainly was a lot bigger. He said so. He did that, and it just got him closer to the other side of what hard work is. It sensibilized him. It made him a lot more grateful for what he had, and also was part of. Those were side benefits. There was what he really wanted to do was to get fit, and he wanted to get fit. That he had that he was challenged in order to stay on track. So by having a job, he's got to go. He has accountability, and he got paid for it. So he got paid for being fit, for getting fit. Normally, if you want to get fit, you have to go and pay to get fit, but he got paid to get fit. And of course, also he's formed the first and only ever Filipino curling team for the Winter Olympics.
He's an amazing guy.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm following him.
Yes.
Darryl, podcasts nowadays, there are so many podcasts coming out. They normally get born from and grow from probably some fun entertainment projects. Same was and is with Blastland. You know our story.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly. I like you're doing. Yes.
Like we are doing, so it came out of the blue. In the end, we are currently developing on machine learning for some corporates and making some prototypes. But it all began with fun entertainment, and we continue doing that. But my question to you is, all these things, if you do the things right, they can become eventually big business, a profitable business. What would you advise to young creators looking to create something? Probably they wouldn't know what to start with. What would be your advices and wisdoms?
Well, the first thing is you've got to be prepared for a lot of work. I think that's something that's always got forgotten, especially in today's instant. Today, everything's instant. Everything's portrayed as instant. You see an advert for the latest accounting software for small businesses. You know, they've had to cut this into a 20-second video in order to keep people's attention. And this looks like, because we all know the problems to do with accounting, issuing bills, just as an example, and then they're all done in 20 seconds. And then that's the mindset you have. If you speak to yourself about it, well, no, of course that's going to take time, but your expectation is going to be quick, and then you give up. You haven't got the staying power. You haven't got the focus and concentration. So yes, a lot of work, and don't do anything when it comes to, especially podcasts, that you don't live and breathe anyway. If you live and breathe something, then I think you are a candidate in order to share it with people. Otherwise, don't do it, because you're doing everybody a favor for not, fogging up the landscape with a podcast that might be 2 episodes, but it's still another podcast to look at compared to many others. So don't. If you live and breathe it, talk about it.
If you were to make a podcast set in 20 years from now, what would it sound like?
Oh, I don't think it's going to sound much different, to be honest. I believe that AI, I know that's something that interests you. It interests me as well. Is a big topic, and we can get AI to write the book, to write the film, to do the podcast. The ear, as long as we're analog, the ear hears authenticity, as in your subconscious hears authenticity, and I think the attribute. The ultimate attribute of a podcast series is that there's people behind it, and it leaves all tech out of the picture, other than we're using tech to distribute it, which is a great help. Without the tech, we wouldn't be able to get the information to anybody who would like to, tune in, so to speak. But podcasting is about people.
That would be my next question, which you partially already commented. Is there a place for AI in, because, these new guys like ElevenLabs, for example, hyper-talented startup from Poland originally, they are dealing completely with sound. So all things like from talking avatars to translations, multi-voicing, and so on. And do you think there is a place for AI in the production, or is it more post-production, which for distribution and so on? What is your statement?
I don't have a particular view on that yet, because it hasn't been around long enough. But I think those who put it in place at the right places, it's going to be a success. If you're doing a series, if you're doing a mini-series, I'm just talking off my head now, where you need a short introduction, which you need to adjust for every episode, AI might be a solution, depending on the kind of production you are producing. As long as you're not lying, as long as you're being very honest about what you are offering to the end user, that's okay. Just generally about AI in the world of audio, radio, podcasts. They said that video killed the radio star. Maybe, probably. It meant that, suddenly radio had to share had to share the video world. I say that social media saved a radio star, because now the radio star, meaning the radio anchor, it's their 2-hour slot has now become a 2-hour slot plus the other 22 hours every day. Because of social media, they can keep people alive and animate them to get more listeners or to maintain their listener base. Taking it one step further, AI certainly has saved the radio station. Because in radio station, there's a lot of repetition or a lot of mundane audio which is required. One example, a smaller station, it has obviously they want to air 24 hours. It has local news. It has local traffic, because, most of radio play is still in the car. When people are consuming radio, a lot of it is in the car. So it costs a lot of money to have a newsreader on the hour every hour through the late hours and early morning hours, as much as having somebody to read out the weather and the traffic report. AI is perfect for that. There's for commercial radio, there's a sponsoring opportunity where they really, let people know it's AI, even though it might not sound it, and that's an honest proposition and a way to use AI. So radio stations don't have to go against the wall, because they're not having to pay somebody for something they didn't pay anybody before really anyway, so they can improve their program.
Is there a particular dream that you have about the future of podcasting and sound in general, or particular?
Nothing springs to mind. I don't think I'm a visionary in that respect. And maybe, I think this is a question I'm going to have to ask myself, actually. It's an interesting question. I can't answer it now, but I'm going to preoccupy myself with it, because certainly maybe I'm not thinking enough. One of those days back in the 90s with the magazines, I take myself with a scruff. But, they say, don't change your winning horse. That doesn't mean keep on looking what else there might be. Some things just really fit. And again, I have to say, the world of audio, podcast, what is its attribute? It's the human element. It's the chatting and hearing people's stories. And we will never tire of people's stories. We'll tire of the same story all the time by the same people, but those stories have exact duplicates for other people. Other people means other audiences, or similar relevance for even more different listeners. So, and we'll always be able, it'll always be the medium that we can consume whilst doing something else. That's not going to change. No amount of AI, no amount of amazing microphones, no amount of amazing headphones, or any other gimmicks you can do. At the end of the day, it's the listening.
I have a dream that once Elon Musk goes to Mars to install an antenna on Mars and to broadcast in the outer space, a podcast.
Yeah, well, the thing is, the only problem with that is that he has a very short attention span, so he'll probably speak to you for exactly 1 minute, and I'm just wondering whether it was worth all the trouble of you getting up there.
Darryl, it has been eye-opening and really, really cool talk. I'm very grateful that you found the time being here with me, and I would really dream of repeating our discussions next time and talking about some other interesting stuff. There's so much interesting out there.
Yes, definitely. Well, look, thank you. Like I said, I'm thrilled to have been here. It's the first time I've been interviewed in a podcast. I've been interviewed on the radio before, but, a podcast, just to close, in the world of audio, radio is in the now. It's time defined, with 60 seconds to a minute, 60 minutes to an hour on the hour. News and weather and maybe traffic. Not that it has to be that way, but it's been perfected. We don't have an issue with that, and there's plenty of opportunities for radio stations to maybe do it at 1:15 or something. It doesn't matter, does it? And podcast is the long form of radio. There, a podcast can be 25 minutes or 26.5 minutes or 4 minutes. That's the beauty of it. So radio can feed the podcast world. You can hear about something on the radio, and then the radio can say, well, there's a longer version of this interview or of this particular band or artist that we are showcasing in our podcast. So podcasts also save the radio station.
That's a nice closing statement. Thank you very much, Darryl.
Thank you, Dimi.